populace re-echoed the protestations of these divines and arose to reinforce their clamour. The whole city had been aroused, and public order was, as a result, seriously threatened. The governor of the province of Fars, Hussein Khan-i-Iravani, surnamed Ajudan Bashi and generally designated in those days as Sahib Ikhtiyar, found it necessary to intervene and to inquire into the cause of this sudden commotion. He was informed that a disciple of a young man named Sayyid-i-Bab, who had just returned from his pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina and was now living in Bushir, had arrived in Shiraz and was propagating the teachings of his master. This disciple, Hussein Khan was further informed, claims that his teacher is the author of a new revelation and is the revealer of a book which he asserts is divinely inspired. Mullah Sadiq-i-Khorasani has embraced that faith and is fearlessly summoning the multitude to the acceptance of that message. He declares its recognition to be the first obligation of every loyal and pious follower of Shia Islam. Hussein Khan ordered the arrest of both Qudus and Mullah Sadiq. The police authorities to whom they were delivered were instructed to bring them handcuffed into the presence of the governor. The police also delivered into the hands of Hussein Khan the copy of the Qayyumul Azma, which they had seized from Mullah Sadiq while he was reading aloud its passages to an excited congregation. Qudus, owing to his youthful appearance and unconventional dress, was at first ignored by Hussein Khan, who preferred to direct his remarks to his more dignified and elderly companion. "Tell me," angrily asked the governor as he turned to Mullah Sadiq, "if you are aware of the opening passage of the Qayyumul Azma, wherein the Sayyid-i-Bab addresses the rulers and kings of the earth in these terms: 'Divest yourselves of the robes of sovereignty, for he who is the king of truth hath been manifest. The kingdom is God's, the most exalted. Thus hath the pen of the Most High decreed.' If this be true, it must necessarily apply to my sovereign, Mohammed Shah of the Qajar dynasty, whom I represent as the chief magistrate of this province. Must Mohammed Shah, according to this behest, lay down his crown and abandon his sovereignty? Must I too abdicate my power and relinquish my position?" Mullah Sadiq unhesitatingly replied, "When once the truth of the revelation announced by the author of these words shall have been definitely established, the truth of whatsoever has fallen from his lips will likewise be vindicated. If these words be the word of God, the abdication of Mohammed Shah and his like can matter but little. It can in no wise turn aside the divine purpose, nor alter the sovereignty of the Almighty and Eternal King." That cruel and impious ruler was sorely displeased with such an answer. He reviled and cursed him, ordered his attendants to strip him of his garments, and to scourge him with 1,000 lashes. He then commanded that the beards of both Qudus and Mullah Sadiq should be burned, their noses be pierced, that through this incision a cord should be passed, and with this halter they should be led through the streets of the city. "It will be an object lesson to the people of Shiraz," Hussein Khan declared, "who will know what the penalty of heresy will be." Mullah Sadiq, calm and self-possessed, and with eyes upraised to heaven, was heard reciting this prayer: "O Lord our God, we have indeed heard the voice of one that called. He called us to the faith, believe ye on the Lord your God, and we have believed. O God our God, forgive us then our sins, and hide away from us our evil deeds, and cause us to die with the righteous." Quran 3:193. With magnificent fortitude both resigned themselves to their fate. Those who had been instructed to inflict this savage punishment performed their task with alacrity and vigor. None intervened in behalf of these sufferers. None was inclined to plead their cause. Soon after this they were both expelled from Shiraz. Before their expulsion they were warned that if they ever attempted to return to this city they would both be crucified. By their sufferings they earned the immortal distinction of having been the first to be persecuted on Persian soil for the sake of their faith. Mullah Ali Ibastami, though the first of all to fall victim to the relentless hate of the enemy, underwent his persecution in Iraq, which lay beyond the confines of Persia. Nor did his sufferings, intense as they were, compare with the hideousness and the barbaric cruelty which characterized the torture inflicted upon Qudus and Mullah Sadiq. An eyewitness of this revolting episode, an unbeliever residing in Shiraz, related to me the following: "I was present when Mullah Sadiq was being scourged. I watched his persecutors each in turn apply the lash to his bleeding shoulders and continue the strokes until he became exhausted. No one believed that Mullah Sadiq, so advanced in age and so frail in body, could possibly survive 50 such savage strokes. We marveled at his fortitude when we found that, although the number of the strokes of the scourge he had received had already exceeded 900, his face still retained its original serenity and calm. A smile was upon his face as he held his hand before his mouth. He seemed utterly indifferent to the blows that were being showered upon him. When he was being expelled from the city, I succeeded in approaching him and asked him why he held his hand before his mouth. I expressed surprise at the smile upon his countenance. He emphatically replied, "The first 7 strokes were severely painful. To the rest I seem to have grown indifferent. I was wondering whether the strokes that followed were being actually applied to my own body. A feeling of joyous exultation had invaded my soul. I was trying to repress my feelings and to restrain my laughter. I can now realize how the Almighty Deliverer is able in the twinkling of an eye to turn pain into ease and sorrow into gladness. Immensely exalted is his power above and beyond the idle fancy of his mortal creatures." Mullah Sadiq, whom I met years after, confirmed every detail of this moving episode. Hussein Khan's anger was not appeased by this atrocious and most undeserved chastisement. His wanton and capricious cruelty found further vent in the assault which he now directed against the person of the Bab. He dispatched to Bushire a mounted escort of his own trusted guard, with emphatic instructions to arrest the Bab and to bring him in chains to Shiraz. The leader of that escort, a member of the Nusayri community, better known as the sect of Aliullahi, related the following. Having completed the 3rd stage of our journey to Bushire, we encountered, in the midst of the wilderness, a youth who wore a green sash and a small turban after the manner of the Siids, who are in the trading profession. He was on horseback and was followed by an Ethiopian servant who was in charge of his belongings. As we approached him, he saluted us and inquired as to our destination. I thought it best to conceal from him the truth and replied that in this vicinity we had been commanded by the governor of Fars to conduct a certain inquiry. He smilingly observed, "The governor has sent you to arrest me. Here am I. Do with me as you please. By coming out to meet you, I have curtailed the length of your march and have made it easier for you to find me." I was startled by his remarks and marveled at his candor and straightforwardness. I could not explain, however, his readiness to subject himself of his own accord to the severe discipline of government officials and to risk thereby his own life and safety. I tried to ignore him and was preparing to leave when he approached me and said, "I swear by the righteousness of him who created man, distinguished him from among the rest of his creatures, and caused his heart to be made the seat of his sovereignty and knowledge, that all my life I have uttered no word but the truth, and had no other desire except the welfare and advancement of my fellow men. I have disdained my own ease, and have avoided being the cause of pain or sorrow to anyone. I know that you are seeking me. I prefer to deliver myself into your hands, rather than subject you and your companions to unnecessary annoyance for my sake." These words moved me profoundly. I instinctively dismounted from my horse and, kissing his stirrups, addressed him in these words, "O light of the eyes of the prophet of God, I adjure you, by him who has created you and endowed you with such loftiness and power, to grant my request and to answer my prayer. I beseech you to escape from this place and to flee from before the face of Hussein Khan, the ruthless and despicable governor of this province. I dread his machinations against you. I rebel at the idea of being made the instrument of his malignant designs against so innocent and noble a descendant of the prophet of God. My companions are all honorable men. Their word is their bond. They will pledge themselves not to betray your flight. I pray you betake yourself to the city of Mashhad in Khorasan and avoid falling a victim to the brutality of this remorseless wolf." To my earnest entreaty he gave this answer, "May the Lord your God requite you for your magnanimity and noble intention. No one knows the mystery of my cause. No one can fathom its secrets. Never will I turn my face away from the decree of God. He alone is my sure stronghold, my stay and my refuge. until my last hour is at hand. None dare assail me, none can frustrate the plan of the Almighty. And when my hour is come, how great will be my joy to quaff the cup of martyrdom in his name. Here am I, deliver me into the hands of your master. Be not afraid, for no one will blame you. I bowed my consent and carried out his desire. The Bab straightway resumed his journey to Shiraz. Free and unfettered, he went before his escort, which followed him in an attitude of respectful devotion. By the magic of his words he had disarmed the hostility of his guards and transmuted their proud arrogance into humility and love. Reaching the city, they proceeded directly to the seat of the government. Whosoever observed the cavalcade marching through the street could not help but marvel at this most unusual spectacle. Immediately Hussein Khan was informed of the arrival of the Bab, he summoned him to his presence. He received him with the utmost insolence, and bade him occupy a seat facing him in the center of the room. He publicly rebuked him, and in abusive language denounced his conduct. "Do you realize," he angrily protested, "what a great mischief you have kindled? Are you aware what a disgrace you have become to the holy faith of Islam, and to the august person of our sovereign? Are you not the man who claims to be the author of a new revelation which annuls the sacred precepts of the Koran?" The Bab calmly replied, "If any bad man come unto you with news, clear up the matter at once, lest through ignorance ye harm others, and be speedily constrained to repent of what ye have done." Quran 49:6. These words inflamed the wrath of Hussein Khan. "What?" he exclaimed. "Dare you ascribe to us evil, ignorance, and folly?" Turning to his attendant, he bade him strike the Bab in the face. So violent was the blow that the Bab's turban fell to the ground. Sheikh Abu Turab, the Imam Jumi of Shiraz, who was present at the meeting and who strongly disapproved of the conduct of Hussein Khan, ordered that the Bab's turban be replaced upon his head, and invited him to be seated by his side. Turning to the governor, the Imam Jumi explained to him the circumstances connected with the revelation of the verse of the Koran which the Bab had quoted, and sought by this means to calm his fury. "This verse which this youth has quoted," he told him, "has made a profound impression upon me. The wise course, I feel, is to inquire into this matter with great care, and to judge him according to the precepts of the Holy Book." Hussein Khan readily consented, whereupon Sheikh Abu Turab questioned the Bab regarding the nature and character of his revelation. The Bab denied the claim of being either the representative of the promised Qaim or the intermediary between him and the faithful. "We are completely satisfied," replied the Imam Jumi. "We shall request you to present yourself on Friday in the Masjid-i Vakhil and to proclaim publicly your denial." As Sheikh Abu Turab arose to depart, in the hope of terminating the proceedings, Hussein Khan intervened and said, "We shall require a person of recognized standing to give bail and surety for him, and to pledge his word in writing that if ever in future this youth should attempt by word or deed to prejudice the interests either of the faith of Islam or of the government of this land, he would straightway deliver him into our hands, and regard himself under all circumstances responsible for his behavior." Haji Mirza Syed Ali, the Bab's maternal uncle, who was present at the meeting, consented to act as the sponsor of his nephew. In his own handwriting he wrote the pledge, affixed to it his seal, confirmed it by the signature of a number of witnesses, and delivered it to the governor, whereupon Hussein Khan ordered that the Bab be entrusted to the care of his uncle, with the condition that at whatever time the governor should deem it advisable, Haji Mirza Syed Ali would at once deliver the Bab into his hands. Haji Mirza Syed Ali, his heart filled with gratitude to God, conducted the Bab to his home and committed him to the loving care of his revered mother. He rejoiced at his family reunion and was greatly relieved by the deliverance of his dear and precious kinsman from the grasp of that malignant tyrant. In the quiet of his own home, the Bab led for a time a life of undisturbed retirement. No one except his wife, his mother, and his uncles had any intercourse with him. Meanwhile, the mischief-makers were busily pressing Sheikh Abu Turab to summon the Bab to the Masjid-i Vakhil and to call upon him to fulfill his pledge. Sheikh Abu Turab was known to be a man of kindly disposition, and of a temperament and nature which bore a striking resemblance to the character of the late Mirza Abul Qasim, the Imam Jumi of Tehran. He was extremely reluctant to treat with contumely persons of recognized standing, particularly if these were residents of Shiraz. Instinctively, he felt this to be his duty, observed it conscientiously, and was as a result universally esteemed by the people of that city. He therefore sought, through evasive answers and repeated postponements, to appease the indignation of the multitude. He found, however, that the stirrers-up of mischief and sedition were bending every effort further to inflame the feelings of general resentment which had seized the masses. He at length felt compelled to address a confidential message to Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, requesting him to bring the Bab with him on Friday to the Masjid-i-Vakil, that he might fulfill the pledge he had given. My hope, he added, is that by the aid of God the statements of your nephew may ease the tenseness of the situation and may lead to your tranquillity as well as to our own. The Bab, accompanied by Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, arrived at the Masjid at a time when the Imam Jumi had just descended the pulpit and was preparing to deliver his sermon. As soon as his eyes fell upon the Bab, he publicly welcomed him, requested him to ascend the pulpit, and called upon him to address the congregation. The Bab, responding to his invitation, advanced towards him, and standing on the first step of the staircase, prepared to address the people. "Come up higher," interjected the Imam Jumi. Complying with his wish, the Bab ascended 2 more steps. As he was standing, his head hid the breast of Sheikh Abu Turab, who was occupying the pulpit top. He began by prefacing his public declaration with an introductory discourse. No sooner had he uttered the opening words of "Praise be to God, who hath in truth created the heavens and the earth," than a certain Seyyid known as Seyyid Shish Pari, whose function was to carry the mace before the Imam Jumi, insolently shouted, "Enough of this idle chatter! Declare now and immediately the thing you intend to say." The Imam Jumi greatly resented the rudeness of the Seyyid's remark. "Hold your peace," he rebuked him. "Be ashamed of your impertinence." He then, turning to the Bab, asked him to be brief, as this, he said, would allay the excitement of the people. The Bab, as he faced the congregation, declared, "The condemnation of God be upon him who regards me either as a representative of the Imam or the gate thereof. The condemnation of God be also upon whosoever imputes to me the charge of having denied the unity of God, or having repudiated the prophethood of Muhammad, the seal of the prophets, of having rejected the truth of any of the messengers of old, or of having refused to recognize the guardianship of Ali, the commander of the faithful, or of any of the Imams who have succeeded him." He then ascended to the top of the staircase, embraced the Imam Jumi, and, descending to the floor of the masjid, joined the congregation for the observance of the Friday prayer. The Imam Jumi intervened and requested him to retire. "Your family," he said, "is anxiously awaiting your return. All are apprehensive lest any harm befall you. Repair to your house, and there offer your prayer. Of greater merit shall this deed be in the sight of God." Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali was also, at the request of the Imam Jumi, asked to accompany his nephew to his home. This precautionary measure, which Sheikh Abu Turab thought it wise to observe, was actuated by the fear lest, after the dispersion of the congregation, a few of the evil-minded among the crowd might still attempt to injure the person of the Bab or endanger his life. But for the sagacity, the sympathy, and the careful attention which the Imam Jumi so strikingly displayed on a number of such occasions, the infuriated mob would doubtless have been led to gratify its savage desire, and would have committed the most abominable of excesses. He seemed to have been the instrument of the invisible hand, appointed to protect both the person and the mission of that youth. The Bab regained his home, and for some time was able to lead in the privacy of his house and in close association with his family and kinsmen a life of comparative tranquillity. In those days he celebrated the advent of the first Nowruz since he had declared his mission. That festival fell in that year on the 10th day of the month of Rabi'ul Awwal, AH 1261, March AD, 1845. A few among those who were present on that memorable occasion in the Masjid-i Vakil and had listened to the statements of the Bab were greatly impressed by the masterly manner in which that youth had, by his unaided efforts, succeeded in silencing his formidable opponents. Soon after this event, they were each led to apprehend the reality of his mission and to recognize its glory. Among them was Sheikh Ali Mirza, the nephew of this same Imam Jumi, a young man who had just attained the age of maturity. The seed implanted in his heart grew and developed until in the year AH 1267, AD 1850 to 51, he was privileged to meet Baha'u'llah in Iraq. That visit filled him with enthusiasm and joy. Returning greatly refreshed to his native land, he resumed with redoubled energy his labors for the cause. From that year until the present time, he has persevered in his task and has achieved distinction by the uprightness of his character and wholehearted devotion to his government and country. Recently, a letter addressed by him to Baha'u'llah has reached the Holy Land, in which he expresses his keen satisfaction at the progress of the cause in Persia. "I am mute with wonder," he writes, "when I behold the evidences of God's unconquerable power manifested among the people of my country. In a land which has for years so savagely persecuted the faith, a man who for 40 years has been known throughout Persia as a Bábí has been made the sole arbitrator in a case of dispute which involves, on the one hand, the Zulu Sultan, the tyrannical son of the Shah, and a sworn enemy of the cause, and on the other, Mirza Fath Ali Khan, the Sahib-i-Divan. It has been publicly announced that whatsoever be the verdict of this Bábí, the same should be unreservedly accepted by both parties, and should be unhesitatingly enforced." A certain Muhammad Karim, who was among the congregation that Friday, was likewise attracted by the Bab's remarkable behavior on that occasion. What he saw and heard on that day brought about his immediate conversion. Persecution drove him out of Persia to Iraq, where, in the presence of Baha'u'llah, he continually deepened his understanding and faith. Later on, he was bidden by him to return to Shiraz and to endeavor, to the best of his ability, to propagate the cause. There he remained and labored to the end of his life. Still another was Mirza Aqay-i-Rikab Saz. He became so enamored of the Bab on that day that no persecution, however severe and prolonged, was able either to shake his convictions or to obscure the radiance of his love. He too attained the presence of Baha'u'llah in Iraq. In answer to the questions which he asked regarding the interpretation of the disconnected letters of the Koran and the meaning of the verse of Nur, he was favored with an expressly written tablet revealed by the pen of Baha'u'llah. In his path he eventually suffered martyrdom. Among them also was Mirza Rahim-i-Kabaz, who distinguished himself by his fearlessness and fiery ardor. He relaxed not in his efforts until the hour of his death. Haji Abul Hassan-i-Bazaz, who, as a fellow traveller of the Bab during his pilgrimage to Hijaz, had but dimly recognized the overpowering majesty of his mission, was, on that memorable Friday, profoundly shaken and completely transformed. He bore the Bab such love that tears of an overpowering devotion continually flowed from his eyes. All who knew him admired the uprightness of his conduct and praised his benevolence and candor. He, as well as his two sons, has proved by his deeds the tenacity of his faith, and has won the esteem of his fellow believers. And yet another of those who felt the fascination of the Bab on that day was the late Haji Muhammad Bisat, a man well versed in the metaphysical teachings of Islam and a great admirer of both Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Qasim. He was of a kindly disposition and was gifted with a keen sense of humor. He had won the friendship of the Imam Jumi, was intimately associated with him, and was a faithful attendant at the Friday congregational prayer. The Nowruz of that year, which heralded the advent of a new springtime, was also symbolic of that spiritual rebirth, the first stirrings of which could already be discerned throughout the length and breadth of the land. A number of the most eminent and learned among the people of that country emerged from the wintry desolation of heedlessness and were quickened by the reviving breath of the new-born revelation. The seeds which the hand of omnipotence had implanted in their hearts germinated into blossoms of the purest and loveliest fragrance. As the breeze of his loving kindness and tender mercy wafted over these blooms, the penetrating power of their perfume spread far and wide over the face of all that land. It diffused itself even beyond the confines of Persia. It reached Kabila and reanimated the souls of those who were waiting in expectation for the return of the Bab to their city. Soon after Nowruz, an epistle reached them by way of Basra, in which the Bab, who had intended to return from Hijaz to Persia by way of Kabila, informed them of the change of his plan and of his consequent inability to fulfill his promise. He directed them to proceed to Isfahan and to remain there until the receipt of further instructions. Should it be deemed advisable, he added, we shall request you to proceed to Shiraz. If not, tarry in Isfahan until such time as God may make known to you his will and guidance. The receipt of this unexpected intelligence created a considerable stir among those who had been eagerly awaiting the arrival of the Bab at Kabila. It agitated their minds and tested their loyalty. "What of his promise to us?" whispered a few of the discontented among them. "Does he regard the breaking of his pledge as the interposition of the will of God?" The others, unlike those waverers, became more steadfast in their faith and clung with added determination to the cause. Faithful to their master, they joyously responded to his invitation, ignoring entirely the criticisms and protestations of those who had faltered in their faith. They set out for Isfahan, determined to abide by whatsoever might be the will and desire of their beloved. They were joined by a few of their companions, who, though gravely shaken in their belief, concealed their feelings. Mirza Muhammad Ali Inari, whose daughter was subsequently joined in wedlock with the most great branch, and Mirza Hadi, the brother of Mirza Muhammad Ali, both residents of Isfahan, were among those companions whose vision of the glory and sublimity of the faith the expressed misgivings of the evil whisperers had failed to obscure. Among them, too, was a certain Muhammad-i Hana Sab, also a resident of Isfahan, who is now serving in the home of Baha'u'llah. A number of these staunch companions of the Bab participated in the great struggle of Sheikh Tabasi, and miraculously escaped the tragic fate of their fallen brethren. On their way to Isfahan they met, in the city of Kangabah, Mullah Hussein with his brother and nephew, who were his companions on his previous visit to Shiraz, and who were proceeding to Kabila. They were greatly delighted by this unexpected encounter, and requested Mullah Hussein to prolong his stay in Kangabah, with which request he readily complied. Mullah Hussein, who, while in that city, led the companions of the Bab in the Friday congregational prayer, was held in such esteem and reverence by his fellow disciples that a number of those present, who later on in Shiraz revealed their disloyalty to the faith, were moved with envy. Among them were Mullah Javad-i Barakani and Mullah Abdul Ali-i Harati, both of whom feigned submission to the revelation of the Bab in the hope of satisfying their ambition for leadership. They both strove secretly to undermine the enviable position achieved by Mullah Hussein. Through their hints and insinuations, they persistently endeavored to challenge his authority and disgrace his name. I have heard Mirza Ahmad-i Khatib, better known in those days as Mullah Abdul Karim, who had been the travelling companion of Mullah Javad from Kazvin, relate the following. Mullah Javad often alluded in his conversation with me to Mullah Hussein. His repeated and disparaging remarks, couched in artful language, impelled me to cease my association with him. Every time I determined to sever my intercourse with Mullah Javad, I was prevented by Mullah Hussein, who, discovering my intention, counselled me to exercise forbearance towards him. Mullah Hussein's association with the loyal companions of the Bab greatly added to their zeal and enthusiasm. They were edified by his example, and were lost in admiration for the brilliant qualities of mind and heart which distinguished so eminent a fellow disciple. Mullah Hussein decided to join the company of his friends, and to proceed with them to Isfahan. Travelling alone, At about a farsang's distance in advance of his companions, he, as soon as he paused at nightfall to offer his prayer, would be overtaken by them, and would, in their company, complete his devotions. He would be the first to resume the journey, and would again be joined by that devoted band at the hour of dawn, when he once more would break his march to offer his prayer. Only when pressed by his friends would he consent to observe the congregational form of worship. On such occasions he would sometimes follow the lead of one of his companions. Such was the devotion which he had kindled in those hearts, that a number of his fellow travellers would dismount from their steeds, and, offering them to those who were journeying on foot, would themselves follow him, utterly indifferent to the strain and fatigues of the march. As they approached the outskirts of Isfahan, Mullah Hussein, fearing that the sudden entry of so large a group of people might excite the curiosity and suspicion of its inhabitants, advised those who were travelling with him to disperse and to enter the gates in small and inconspicuous numbers. A few days after their arrival, there reached them the news that Shiraz was in a state of violent agitation, that all manner of intercourse with the Bab had been forbidden, and that their projected visit to that city would be fraught with the gravest danger. Mullah Hussein, quite undaunted by this sudden intelligence, decided to proceed to Shiraz. He acquainted only a few of his trusted companions with his intention. Discarding his robes and turban, and wearing the jubi and kula of the people of Khorasan, he, disguising himself as a horseman of Hizari and Kushan, and accompanied by his brother and nephew, set out at an unexpected hour for the city of his beloved. As he approached its gate, he instructed his brother to proceed in the dead of night to the house of the Bab's maternal uncle, and to request him to inform the Bab of his arrival. Mullah Hussein received the next day the welcome news that Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali was expecting him an hour after sunset outside the gate of the city. Mullah Hussein met him at the appointed hour, and was conducted to his home. Several times at night did the Bab honour that house with his presence, and continue in close association with Mullah Hussein until the break of day. Soon after this, he gave permission to his companions who had gathered in Isfahan to leave gradually for Shiraz, and there to wait until it should be feasible for him to meet them. He cautioned them to exercise the utmost vigilance, instructed them to enter, a few at a time, the gate of the city, and bade them disperse immediately upon their arrival into such quarters as were reserved for travellers, and accept whatever employment they could find. The first group to reach the city and meet the Bab a few days after the arrival of Mullah Hussein consisted of Mirza Muhammad Ali-i Nahri, Mirza Hadi, his brother, Mullah Abdul Karami Qazvini, Mullah Javad-i Baragani, Mullah Abdul Ali-i Hirati, and Mirza Ibrahim-i Shirazi. In the course of their association with him, the last three of the group gradually betrayed their blindness of heart and demonstrated the baseness of their character. The manifold evidences of the Bab's increasing favour towards Mullah Hussein aroused their anger and excited the smouldering fire of their jealousy. In their impotent rage, they resorted to the abject weapons of fraud and of calumny. Unable at first to manifest openly their hostility to Mullah Hussein, they sought by every crafty device to beguile the minds and damp the affections of his devoted admirers. Their unseemly behaviour alienated the sympathy of the believers and precipitated their separation from the company of the faithful. Expelled by their very acts from the bosom of the faith, they leagued themselves with its avowed enemies, and proclaimed their utter rejection of its claims and principles. So great was the mischief which they stirred up among the people of that city that they were eventually expelled by the civil authorities, who alike despised and feared their plottings. The Bab has, in a tablet in which he expiates upon their machinations and misdeeds, compared them to the calf of the Samiri, the calf that had neither voice nor soul, which was both the abject handiwork and the object of the adoration of a wayward people. May thy condemnation, O God, he wrote with reference to Mullah Javad and Mullah Abdul Ali, rest upon the Jibt of Tagut, which is from the Quran 450. The twin idols of this perverse people. All three subsequently proceeded to Kirman and joined forces with Haji Mirza Muhammad Karim Khan, whose designs they furthered and the vehemence of whose denunciations they strove to reinforce. One night, after their expulsion from Shiraz, the Bab, who was visiting the home of Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, where he had summoned to meet him Mirza Muhammad Ali Inari, Mirza Hadi, and Mullah Abdul Karim-i Qazvini, turned suddenly to the last named and said, "Abdul Karim, are you seeking the manifestation?" These words, uttered with calm and extreme gentleness, had a startling effect upon him. He paled at this sudden interrogation and burst into tears. He threw himself at the feet of the Bab in a state of profound agitation. The Bab took him lovingly in his arms, kissed his forehead, and invited him to be seated by his side. In a tone of tender affection, he succeeded in appeasing the tumult of his heart. As soon as they had regained their home, Mirza Muhammad Ali and his brother inquired of Mullah Abdul Karim the reason for the violent perturbation which had suddenly seized him. "Hear me," he answered. "I will relate to you the tale of a strange experience, a tale which I have shared with no one until now. When I attained the age of maturity, I felt, while I lived in Qazvin, a profound yearning to unravel the mystery of God and to apprehend the nature of his saints and the prophets. Nothing short of the acquisition of learning, I felt, could enable me to achieve my goal. I succeeded in obtaining the consent of my father and uncles to the abandonment of my business and plunged immediately into study and research. I occupied a room in one of the madrises of Qazvin and concentrated my efforts on the acquisition of every available branch of human learning. I often discussed the knowledge which I had acquired with my fellow disciples, and sought by this means to enrich my experience. At night I would retire to my home, and in the seclusion of my library would devote many an hour to undisturbed study. I was so immersed in my labors that I grew indifferent to both sleep and hunger. Within 2 years I had resolved to master the intricacies of Muslim jurisprudence and theology. I was a faithful attendant at the lectures given by Mullah Abdul Karim-i Iravani, who in those days ranked as the most outstanding divine of Qazvin. I greatly admired his vast erudition, his piety and virtue. Every night, during the period that I was his disciple, I devoted my time to the writing of a treatise, which I submitted to him, and which he revised with care and interest. He seemed to be greatly pleased with my progress, and often extolled my high attainments. One day, in the presence of his assembled disciples, he declared, "The learned and sagacious Mullah Abdul Karim has qualified himself to expound authoritatively the sacred scriptures of Islam. He no longer needs to attend either my classes or those of my equals. I shall, please God, celebrate his elevation to the rank of a mujtahid on the morning of the coming Friday, and will deliver his certificate to him after the congregational prayer." No sooner had Mullah Abdul Karim spoken these words and departed than his disciples came forward and heartily congratulated me on my accomplishments. I returned, greatly elated, to my home. Upon my arrival I discovered that both my father and my elder uncle, Haji Hussein Ali, both of whom were greatly esteemed throughout Qazvin, were preparing a feast in my honor, with which they intended to celebrate the completion of my studies. I requested them to postpone the invitation they had extended to the notables of Qazvin until further notice from me. They gladly consented, believing that in my eagerness for such a festival I would not unduly postpone it. That night I repaired to my library, and in the privacy of my cell pondered the following thoughts in my heart. Had you not fondly imagined, I said to myself, that only the sanctified in spirit could ever hope to attain the station of an authoritative expounder of the sacred scriptures of Islam? Was it not your belief that whoso attained this station would be immune from error? Are you not already accounted among those who enjoy this rank? Has not Qazvin's most distinguished divine recognized and declared you to be such? Be fair. Do you in your own heart regard yourself as having attained that state of purity and sublime detachment which you, in days past, considered the requisites for one who aspires to reach that exalted position? Think you yourself to be free from every taint of selfish desire? As I sat musing, a feeling of my own unworthiness gradually overpowered me. I recognized myself as still a victim of cares and perplexities, of temptations and doubts. I was oppressed by such thoughts as to how I should conduct my classes, how to lead my congregation in prayer, how to enforce the laws and precepts of the faith. I felt continually anxious as to how I should discharge my duties, how to ensure the superiority of my achievements over those who had preceded me. I was overcome with such a sense of humiliation that I felt impelled to seek forgiveness from God. Your aim in acquiring all this learning, I thought to myself, has been to unravel the mystery of God and to attain the state of certitude. Be fair. Are you sure of your own interpretation of the Koran? Are you certain that the laws which you promulgate reflect the will of God? The consciousness of error suddenly dawned upon me. I realized for the first time how the rust of learning had corroded my soul and had obscured my vision. I lamented my past and deplored the futility of my endeavors. I knew that the people of my own rank were subject to the same afflictions. As soon as they had acquired this so-called learning, they would claim to be the exponents of the law of Islam and would arrogate to themselves the exclusive privilege of pronouncing upon its doctrine. I remained absorbed in my thoughts until dawn. That night I neither ate nor slept. At times I would commune with God. Thou seest me, O my Lord, and thou beholdest my plight. Thou knowest that I cherish no other desire except thy holy will and pleasure. I am lost in bewilderment at the thought of the multitude of sects into which thy holy faith has fallen. I am deeply perplexed when I behold the schisms that have torn the religions of the past. Wilt thou guide me in my perplexities and relieve me of my doubts? Whither am I to turn for consolation and guidance? I wept so bitterly that night that I seemed to have lost consciousness. There suddenly came to me the vision of a great gathering of people, the expression of whose shining faces greatly impressed me. A noble figure, attired in the garb of a Seyyid, occupied a seat on the pulpit facing the congregation. He was expounding the meaning of the sacred verse of the Koran, "Whoso maketh efforts for us in our ways will we guide them." I was fascinated by his face. I arose, advanced towards him, and was on the point of throwing myself at his feet when that vision suddenly vanished. My heart was flooded with light. My joy was indescribable. I immediately decided to consult Haji Al-Awadi, father of Muhammad Javad-i Farhadi, a man known throughout Qazvin for his deep spiritual insight. When I related to him my vision, he smiled and, with extraordinary precision, described to me the distinguishing features of the Seyyid who had appeared to me. That noble figure, he added, was none other than Haji Sayyid Kazim-i Rashti, who is now in Karbala, and who may be seen expounding every day to his disciple the sacred teachings of Islam. Those who listened to his discourse are refreshed and edified by his utterance. I can never describe the impression which his words exert upon his hearers. I joyously arose, and expressing to him my feelings of profound appreciation, retired to my home and started forthwith on my journey to Karbala. My old fellow disciples came and entreated me either to call in person on the learned Mullah Abdul Karim, who had expressed a desire to meet me, or to allow him to come to my house. "I feel the impulse," I replied, "to visit the shrine of the Imam Hussein at Karbala. I have vowed to start immediately on that pilgrimage. I cannot postpone my departure. I will, if possible, visit him for a few moments when I start to leave the city. If I cannot, I would beg him to excuse me and to pray in my behalf that I may be guided on the straight path." I confidentially acquainted my relatives with the nature of my vision and its interpretation. I informed them of my projected visit to Karbala. My words to them that very day instilled the love of Sayyid Kazim in their hearts. They felt greatly drawn to Haji Al-Awadi, freely associated with him, and became his fervent admirers. My brother, Abdul Hamid, who later quaffed the cup of martyrdom in Tehran, accompanied me on my journey to Karbala. There I met Sayyid Kazim, and was amazed to hear him discourse to his assembled disciples under exactly the same circumstances as he had appeared to me in my vision. I was astounded when I discovered, upon my arrival, that he was expounding the meaning of the same verse which he, when he appeared to me, was explaining to his disciples. As I sat and listened to him, I was greatly impressed by the force of his argument and the profundity of his thoughts. He graciously received me and showed me the utmost kindness.